You ever watch your own boat get hijacked on a live stream while you're stuck 30,000 feet in the air? The first thing I saw when the plane touched down in Tampa was a wall of missed calls lighting up my phone screen like emergency flares. 3 from my brother Luke, 7 from my neighbor Patricia, 12 texts stacked on top of each other, so fast my phone almost froze in my hand. Outside the airport windows, rain hammered the pavement in silver sheets, and somewhere beyond the parking garage, I could already smell salt water rolling in from the bay. I should have known something was wrong the second Luke sent me a message that just said, "Cole, don't lose your mind." Then the video loaded. Bass-heavy party music shook the speakers in my phone hard enough to rattle the cheap airport bench under me. Blue and purple LED lights flashed across dark water. People were laughing. Champagne sprayed through the air. Somebody had mounted temporary floodlights along the rails of my boat like it was some floating nightclub. And standing dead center on the upper deck in a white dress with a champagne flute raised over her head was Heather Holloway, HOA president, self-appointed queen of Clearwater Cove Marina. The woman hated me from the day I moved into that neighborhood. I watched her grin into someone's phone camera while my inherited 34-foot Sea Ray drifted across the lake behind her like some kind of stolen trophy. "Now this," she shouted over the music, "is how the Cove should look every weekend." The crowd cheered. My stomach dropped so hard, I actually tasted metal in the back of my throat. That boat wasn't some luxury toy I barely used. My father left it to me before cancer took him 3 summers ago. Every scratch in the teak flooring had a memory attached to it. Every tool in the engine compartment still smelled like his hands: diesel fuel, machine oil, lake water, and Old Spice aftershave. I spent 6 years rebuilding those twin engines myself after work every night at the marina. And now Heather was using it for an HOA cocktail party while I was away servicing storm-damaged rescue boats down in Corpus Christi. The next video hit even harder. Somebody onshore recorded Heather pulling away from my private dock while sparks flew from the busted chain she'd apparently cut off my marina gate. My chest tightened watching pieces of metal swing against the dock posts. The crunch of fiberglass rubbing too hard against the bumpers made my skin crawl. She wasn't easing the boat out properly either. She shoved the throttles forward too fast like she was driving a rental car instead of vessel worth more than most houses in that neighborhood. Luke finally answered when I called him from baggage claim. Wind roared through his phone speaker. "Cole, I tried stopping her," he yelled. Heather said the HOA had temporary access rights for community recreation events. I almost laughed hearing that. Temporary access rights. The woman treated HOA bylaws like federal law anytime it benefited her. How the hell did she even start it? I asked. "No idea," Luke said, but she had one of those marina maintenance guys with her. That made my jaw tighten instantly, because there was one thing almost nobody in that neighborhood knew about my boat. The Sea Ray still carried an active emergency marine assistance registration from when Dad volunteered with Gulf Storm Response Operations. It had Coast Guard certified beacon systems tied into the onboard electrical panel. Even after I restored the boat for private use, federal emergency tracking requirements stayed active under maritime registry law unless formally removed. I told Luke to send me every video he had. Then I stepped outside into warm Florida rain and opened the final clip. The camera shook wildly as somebody screamed, laughing from another boat nearby. Heather's party yacht cut across the black water at full throttle, wake spraying behind it under neon party lights. Then distant sirens echoed across the lake. Blue lights exploded against the surface of the water like shattered glass. Another boat appeared behind them fast. White hull, government striping, Coast Guard. The music on Heather's boat stopped almost instantly. Even through the grainy phone footage, I could see people turning around in panic. Then the camera zoomed tighter on Heather's face. And for the very first time since I met, that woman, she looked scared. I bought the house in Clearwater Cove because I was tired of noise, tired of city traffic, tired of people who talk too much and listen too little. After 15 years working marine engines up and down the Gulf Coast, all I wanted was a quiet dock, cold coffee at sunrise, and the sound of water tapping against wood pilings at night. My father used to say you can tell the truth about a man by the way he treats a boat. Careless men slam throttles. Lazy men ignore maintenance. Entitled people touch things they do not own. Heather Holloway checked every box on that list the day she moved into the neighborhood. The first time she introduced herself, she was wearing white tennis clothes so spotless they looked dry cleaned straight onto her body. Expensive perfume floated through the marina parking lot strong enough to cover the smell of salt water and gasoline. She shook my hand once, glanced at the grease under my fingernails, then stared at my dock tools like they personally offended her. "You really leave all this equipment out in public view?" she asked. I remember tightening a fuel filter while she stood there waiting for me to apologize for having a job. "It is a marina," I told her. "Boats need maintenance." Her smile tightened instantly. That was 2 years ago. Ever since then, Heather treated my dock slip like an eyesore in her floating country club fantasy. Violation notices showed up for everything. Engine noise during approved hours. Extension cords. Cleaning supplies. One time she tried fining me because my tackle box was visible from the walking path. Meanwhile, half the HOA board parked golf carts on the grass every weekend, holding wine coolers like they own the county. The hypocrisy smelled worse than low tide in August. But the boat really drove her crazy. Dad named it the Mariner back in 2009 after Hurricane Ike tore through the coast. That boat spent years helping transport supplies during flood response work. Even after he passed, I kept the emergency registration active because old habits die hard around the water. The Coast Guard auxiliary beacon system still sat hidden behind the electrical panel under the helm. Most people would never notice it unless they knew exactly what they were looking for. Heather definitely did not. To her, it was just another expensive lake toy owned by the wrong kind of neighbor. Working class. Quiet. Not impressed by her. I pulled into Clearwater Cove Marina a little after midnight while rainwater hissed across the windshield. The lake looked black under the storm clouds, except for blue emergency lights still flickering near Dock C. My dock. Even from the parking lot, I could smell spilled alcohol mixed with wet fiberglass and overheated engines. The music was gone now. So were the party guests. All that remained was silence and flashing Coast Guard strobes reflecting across the water like broken neon. And sitting crooked against my dock bumpers was my father's boat. Rainwater dripped off the marina roof in steady ticks while I walked down Dock C toward my slip. What would creaked under my boots? Somewhere farther out on the lake, thunder rolled low and heavy across the water. The Mariner sat crooked against the pilings like a tired animal after a long fight. One docking light was cracked. The port side rail had fresh scratches running along the chrome, and somebody had spilled pink cocktail mix all over the rear deck cushions. The sweet artificial smell mixed with gasoline and lake algae in the humid night air hard enough to make my stomach turn. 2 Coast Guard officers stood beside the boat, talking quietly near the dock box. Their white uniforms reflected blue emergency strobes across the water in sharp flashes. One of them looked up when I approached. Tall guy, short brown hair, calm eyes that looked like they had already seen enough stupidity for one night. "Cole Bennett," he asked. "Yeah." He extended a hand. "Officer Daniel Reeves." His grip was firm, professional. "Not hostile. This your vessel?" I nodded once. Daniel glanced back at the boat and exhaled slowly through his nose like he was trying very hard not to say something sarcastic. "Sir, your HOA president just turned a registered emergency marine vessel into a floating nightclub." Even exhausted, I almost laughed hearing it said out loud. The absurdity hit differently. Standing there looking at the mess myself. Empty champagne bottles rolled across the deck every time the boat shifted against the dock lines. Somebody had left wet towels hanging over the radar housing. One stiletto heel sat abandoned near the captain's chair like Cinderella after a DUI checkpoint. "Where's Heather now?" I asked. Daniel tilted his head toward the marina office parking lot. Sitting inside with another officer trying to explain why she ignored multiple stop signals on federal water after triggering an emergency beacon. There it was, the beacon. I closed my eyes for half a second hearing those words. Dad used to drill emergency procedures into me when I was a teenager. Never disable the beacon manually unless authorized. Never tamper with registry systems. Never hand a wheel to someone who thinks boats are toys instead of responsibility. Heather managed all three in one night. Daniel stepped onto the dock beside me while rain tapped softly against the canvas cover overhead. She claimed the HOA had authority to access abandoned recreational property, he said. Then she claimed you verbally approved the event. I stared at him. I was in Texas. We figured that out pretty fast. The marina office door suddenly opened behind us. Loud voices spilled out into the rain. Heather Holloway stepped outside, wrapped in a beige raincoat over her white party dress. Mascara streaked slightly under one eye now. Hair damp from humidity. For the first time since I met her, she looked less like a queen running a neighborhood and more like somebody realizing the rules finally applied to her too. Then her eyes landed on me, standing beside the boat, and she froze completely. Heza recovered fast. That was the dangerous thing about people like her. They could go from panic to performance in under 3 seconds. One deep breath, and the fake confidence came sliding right back across her face like makeup over a cracking glass. She pulled her raincoat tighter and walked toward me across the wet dock with those sharp little heels clicking against the wood. Even soaked from the storm, she still carried herself like she was entering a charity gala instead of federal investigation. Cole, she said carefully, forcing a smile that looked painful around the edges. Thank goodness you're finally here. This entire misunderstanding has been blown completely out of proportion. Daniel Reeves folded his arms beside me, but stayed quiet. Smart man. Heather kept talking before anybody could interrupt her. Your boat was sitting in use for months, she said. The HOA board agreed it would be wonderful community engagement to host a marina appreciation night. I stared at her for a second, trying to process the audacity. Rain tapped softly against the dock roof above us, while water slapped against the hull below. Somewhere behind the marina office, somebody dragged a folding chair across concrete with a long metallic scrape that echoed through the night. You cut my dock chain, I said. Heather waved one hand, dismissively like property damage was a minor social inconvenience. The chain was preventing temporary community access. I actually laughed at that, not because it was funny, because hearing somebody weaponize corporate HOA language to justify stealing a boat at midnight sounded completely insane out loud. But Heather was committed now. Frankly, she continued, lowering her voice, if you had participated more in neighborhood activities, this could have been coordinated professionally. There it was, the real problem. Not the boat, not the beacon, not the Coast Guard. Me. Heather hated anybody in Clearwater Cove who did not play her social climbing game. The retired contractors, the fishermen, the widows living on fixed income. Anybody who smelled more like hard work than luxury perfume automatically became a project for her. Patricia Moore warned me about that the first week I moved in. Heather does not want neighbors, she told me once while handing me fresh snapper at the marina cleaning station. She wants an audience. And audiences do not question the script. Daniel finally stepped forward beside me. Ma'am, he said calmly, you are operating a federally registered marine vessel while impaired and after sunset without authorization. Heather turned instantly toward him with that same practiced smile politicians use, before saying something completely ridiculous. Officer Reeves, I think we both know this is excessive. Nobody was harmed. We were simply enjoying the lake. Daniel's expression did not change. You also disabled an active emergency signal system that made her freeze for half a heartbeat. Tiny reaction, barely visible, but I caught it. So did Daniel. Heather glanced at me quickly, then back at him. I did not disable anything. Actually, Daniel replied, you switched off the primary console transmitter at 10:42 p.m. The rain suddenly felt colder around us. Heather's jaw tightened slightly. Well, perhaps your system is faulty because I never touched anything inappropriate. Daniel reached into a waterproof evidence pouch and pulled out printed marina security photos. Clear, time-stamped images. Heather leaning over my helm console with a champagne glass in one hand and the emergency panel open beside her. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like somebody dimmed the lights behind her eyes. Our systems recorded everything after the beacon switched to automatic backup mode, Daniel said quietly, including location tracking. Heather opened her mouth. Close it again. For the first time all night, she had no speech ready. No HOA vocabulary. No polished little suburban power phrases. Just silence. And standing there watching rain drip off the edge of my father's boat, I realized something important. Heather Holloway genuinely believed rules only existed for other people. Heather spent the next 20 minutes trying to talk her way out of reality. Watching it happen was almost impressive in a sad kind of way. One minute she blamed the marina maintenance staff. The next minute she claimed the emergency system activated accidentally because somebody spilled champagne near the controls. Then suddenly the entire thing became my fault for owning confusing equipment on a recreational vessel. The rain finally eased into a soft mist drifting across the docks, while officers photographed the boat from every angle. Camera flashes bounced off wet fiberglass and chrome rails. Every click sounded like another nail sealing Heather into a problem she could no longer smile her way out of. I stepped aboard the Mariner carefully, feeling the deck shift slightly under my boots. Empty plastic cups rolled across the floor with hollow little rattles. Somebody had tracked mud across the rear seating area. My father's old navigation compass had sticky fingerprints smeared across the glass. That bothered me more than the scratches. Strange how small things hit hardest. Daniel followed me onto the deck while another officer continued speaking with Heather near the marina office. "There is more," he said quietly. I looked at him. "What do you mean more?" He pointed toward the helm console. "Your secondary beacon did exactly what it was designed to do. Once the primary system was interrupted, backup emergency logging activated automatically. I already knew enough maritime systems to understand where this was going, but hearing it out loud still made my chest tighten." Daniel opened a waterproof tablet and turned the screen toward me. A digital tracking map filled the display. Every movement of the boat across the lake had been recorded in precise detail. Timestamps, speed changes, restricted wake violations, emergency maneuver alerts. Then he zoomed in on one section near the North Channel markers. This happened at 11:14 p.m. The track line jerked sharply across the map before correcting itself. My jaw clenched immediately. She almost grounded it. Daniel nodded once. "Looks like she entered a marked emergency access lane at speed." Cold air rolled off the lake hard enough to raise goosebumps along my arms. That channel existed specifically for rescue and storm response traffic during emergencies. Nobody in Clearwater Cove even used it recreationally because the underwater shelf near Marker 12 could tear straight through a hole if you drifted too close. Dad nearly lost a propeller there once during a tropical storm cleanup years ago. Heather had no business anywhere near that lane. None. Daniel studied my expression carefully. "Your vessel registration triggered automatic federal response because of the emergency route entry combined with the disabled signal system." I exhaled slowly through my nose. So she basically hijacked the wrong boat. One corner of Daniel's mouth twitched slightly like he wanted to laugh professionally, but could not quite allow himself to. That is one way to put it. Back on shore, raised voices suddenly echoed through the marina. Heather again. Even from 50 feet away, I could hear the sharp edge returning to her voice now that panic was morphing into anger. "This is harassment," she snapped at one of the officers. "I am the elected president of Clearwater Cove, HOA. The officer sounded unimpressed. "Ma'am, that title does not override maritime law." I leaned against the wet rail for a second, watching her from the deck. Expensive raincoat, wet hair, hands shaking slightly now every time she gestured. And suddenly I remembered something Patricia Moore told me last summer after Heather fined a retired veteran over an unapproved American flag bracket. People like Heather only feel powerful until somebody more official walks into the room. The marina parking lot glowed silver under floodlights while rainwater streamed along the pavement toward the lake, toward the edge of the dock, toward my boat. and standing there watching Coast Guard officers photograph evidence around her luxury party disaster, Heather Holloway was finally realizing something terrifying. The lake did not belong to the HOA. By 2 o'clock in the morning, half the neighborhood had gathered behind the marina fence pretending they were not watching. Clearwater Cove residents love drama as long as it happened to somebody else. Rain mist floated under the floodlights while whispered conversations moved through the crowd like insects in tall grass. I recognized nearly everybody standing there. Retired couples in golf jackets. 2 board members clutching travel coffee mugs. A teenager still filming on his phone even after his mother told him 3 times to stop. Nobody was leaving because everybody sensed the same thing. Heather Holloway's perfect little image was cracking wide open in public. She stood beside the marina office now, with her arms folded tightly across her chest, while an officer finished paperwork on the hood of a patrol SUV. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the crowd, and every time she did, somebody immediately looked away, pretending not to stare. That probably scared her more than the Coast Guard. Losing control of the audience. Daniel stepped down from my boat, carrying another evidence case, while I checked the engine compartment for damage. The familiar smell of warm oil and lake water settled my nerves a little. Machines made sense. Systems made sense. Entitled people pretending rules did not apply to them never made sense to me. Your engines are fine, Daniel said. Honestly, you were lucky she did not destroy the lower unit. I wiped rainwater off my hand with an old rag. Heather thinks horsepower means social status. She has no idea what machinery actually costs. Daniel gave one slow nod toward the parking lot. Well, she is learning tonight. Across the dock, one of the officers opened the rear door of the Coast Guard response vehicle so Heather could retrieve her purse. Even from this distance, I could hear her voice climbing higher with every sentence. I know county commissioners personally, she snapped. This entire thing is going to disappear once lawyers get involved. The officer barely reacted. Ma'am, federal marine violations do not disappear because you know somebody at a wine fundraiser. I had to look away for a second just to hide my smile. Then Heather saw me standing on the dock beside the mariner. The expression on her face shifted instantly. Anger, embarrassment, calculation. She marched toward me across the wet planks again, stopping only a few feet away. Cole, she said sharply, you need to tell them this was a misunderstanding. Water dripped steadily from the edge of her coat sleeve onto the dock between us. You know I would never intentionally damage your property. I stared at her for a long moment. The same woman who fined residents over flower pots now wanted mercy because federal officers showed up. Funny how quickly authority people become victims the second real authority enters the room. You cut my marina lock, I said calmly. You took my boat without permission. The HOA board approved temporary usage. The HOA board does not own the lake. Her jaw tightened immediately. Tiny movement, but enough. Heather leaned closer and lowered her voice. Do you understand how humiliating this is? The question almost stunned me. Not because she asked it, because she genuinely believed humiliation was the real injustice happening tonight. Not theft, not trespassing, not tampering with emergency equipment. Embarrassment. I could smell expensive perfume mixing with rainwater and lake algae while she stood there waiting for sympathy she had not earned. You should probably get used to it, I told her quietly. Behind us, Daniel approached carrying a clipboard and several printed forms sealed inside plastic covers. Ma'am, he said professionally, we need your signature acknowledging vessel seizure documentation pending formal review. Heather blinked twice. Vessel seizure? Daniel nodded toward my boat. Until federal reporting is complete, this vessel remains under temporary investigative hold. The color drained from her face again. Around us, the marina went dead quiet except for water tapping softly against dock posts. Then one of the HOA residents near the parking lot whispered something that carried farther than he probably intended. She stole the wrong guy's boat. And, judging by the look in Heather Holloway's eyes, she was finally starting to understand exactly how true that was. The marina looked completely different by sunrise. Storm clouds had rolled east overnight, leaving the lake flat and gray under early morning light. Humidity hung heavy in the air, thick enough to taste. The smell of wet wood, gasoline, and burnt coffee drifted across the docks while maintenance crews quietly cleaned up abandoned decorations from Heather's disaster party. Deflated silver balloons bounced against the fence line every time the wind picked up. Somebody had forgotten a portable speaker near the fuel station, and every few minutes it crackled with static before dying again. Clearwater Cove residents were already gathering in little clusters around the Marina Cafe, pretending they were there for breakfast. Nobody fooled anybody. Word had spread through the neighborhood before dawn. Heather Holloway had been stopped by the Coast Guard on stolen property, and now everybody wanted details. I sat on the rear deck of the Mariner with a wrench in one hand, tightening a loose rail fitting while Luke handed me coffee from the dock. "You are basically local entertainment now," he said. I glanced toward the cafe patio. Half the HOA board immediately looked away the second I caught them staring. "Good," I muttered. "Maybe they will stop measuring mailbox heights for one morning." Luke laughed into his cup. The tension in his shoulders finally seemed gone now that the chaos settled into paperwork instead of panic. Around 8 o'clock, a black SUV rolled into the marina parking lot. Heather stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Smart move. The woman looked exhausted. Her perfect image had taken a beating overnight. Her hair was pulled back too quickly. Makeup rushed. The expensive confidence still existed, but now it looked dented around the edges. She spotted me immediately and froze beside the marina office entrance while several residents openly whispered nearby. Nobody rushed over to support her anymore. Funny how fast suburban loyalty disappears once federal vehicles show up. Daniel Reeves arrived a few minutes later carrying another evidence folder under one arm. His boots hit the dock with steady heavy thumps while seagulls screamed somewhere above the slips. "Morning, Bennett," he said. "Morning." He nodded toward Heather without lowering his voice. Marina security finished reviewing camera footage from last night. Heather's shoulders stiffened instantly. Daniel opened the folder calmly. "Turns out there were 3 separate, unauthorized entries onto your dock this week before the party." My eyes narrowed. 3. Daniel slid printed photos across the dock table beside me. Clear timestamps. Heather. 2 marina contractors. Both cutters. Cases of alcohol being loaded aboard my boat the afternoon before the event. One image showed Heather literally pointing toward my electrical panel while talking to one of the workers. The smell of fresh coffee suddenly tasted bitter in my mouth. She planned this days ahead, Luke muttered beside me. "Looks that way." Across the dock, Heather finally marched toward us again, but the energy was different now. Less queen of the neighborhood, more corner politician during a press conference. "I already explained everything," she snapped. "This is becoming harassment." Daniel barely looked up from his paperwork. "Actually, ma'am, this is becoming documentation." A few people at the cafe patio heard that line and immediately pretended not to smile. Heather noticed too. Her face flushed red under the sunglasses. "You people are acting like I committed some major crime over a neighborhood social event." Daniel closed the folder carefully. "Ma'am, you accessed restricted marine property, tampered with emergency equipment, and operated a federally registered vessel without authorization." Then he paused just long enough for the silence to sharpen around her. "And now we have evidence the event was planned in advance." Heather opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time since this entire nightmare started, she genuinely looked lost. Not angry, not superior. Lost. Because the thing people like Heather never expect is records. Cameras. Timestamps. Systems that do not care how important you think you are at HOA meetings. A gull landed on the dock rail beside us while sunlight finally broke through the clouds across the lake. The water turned silver under the morning light, and standing there surrounded by residents quietly watching her fall apart piece by piece, Heather Holloway was learning the hardest lesson of her life. The lake remembered everything. By late afternoon, the marina had turned into a pressure cooker wrapped in fake politeness. The storm was gone completely now. Bright Florida sunlight bounced off the lake hard enough to hurt your eyes, and the heat rising from the docks carried that familiar mix of salt water, sunscreen, gasoline, and old bait buckets. Every conversation stopped the second Heather walked by. Nobody confronted her directly. They just watched, quietly. The same people who used to laugh at her HOA wine nights were suddenly fascinated by their phones whenever she appeared. Public humiliation works differently in wealthy neighborhoods. Nobody yells. They simply stop, pretending to admire you. I spent most of the day repairing minor damage on the Mariner while Coast Guard investigators finished paperwork nearby. The cracked docking light needed replacing. One navigation sensor had been knocked loose. Somebody spilled sticky fruit liquor inside the storage compartment beneath the helm, and a sugary smell still clung to the fiberglass despite 3 cleanings. Every scrape on that boat felt personal. Dad used to say boats carry memories in layers. Salt, weather, wear marks, human fingerprints. Looking around at the mess Heather's party left behind felt like finding muddy footprints across a family photograph. Around 3 o'clock, the HOA emergency board meeting started inside the Marina clubhouse. That alone told me everything. Heather never scheduled emergency meetings unless she was scared. Through the clubhouse windows, I could see residents packed shoulder to shoulder around folding tables while ceiling fans spun lazily overhead. Some people looked angry. Others looked nervous. Mostly they looked embarrassed they had ever treated Heather like local royalty. Luke walked up beside me carrying another bottle of water. "Patricia texted me," he said. "Apparently the board is trying to distance themselves from Heather now." I tightened a screwdriver against the rail mount. "Of course they are." "Funny thing," Luke added. Nobody seemed worried when she was fining everybody over garbage cans. That hit harder than I expected because it was true. Heather stayed powerful for years because people kept choosing comfort over confrontation. Easier to pay the fine. Easier to stay quiet. Easier to let somebody else become the target. Until federal vehicles showed up with flashing lights, and suddenly everybody discovered morals overnight. The clubhouse doors burst open 40 minutes later. Raised voices spilled across the marina parking lot. Then Heather emerged first. Fussed. Angry. Sunglasses gone now. Face flushed red under the heat. Several board members followed behind her looking like exhausted accountants after a tax raid. Heather spotted me near the dock immediately. "This is your fault," she snapped loud enough for half the marina to hear. I looked up slowly from the engine hatch. "You stole my boat." Your constant hostility toward the HOA created this entire situation. There is again the magical ability people like Heather have to transform consequences into persecution. Daniel Reeves stepped out of the clubhouse, behind her holding another folder under one arm. "Actually, ma'am," he said calmly, "your own board just confirmed they never approved use of Mr. Bennett's vessel." The silence after that line felt enormous. Even the gulls circling above the docks seemed quieter somehow. Heather blinked hard. "What?" Daniel opened the folder. "We received signed statements from 4 board members confirming no authorization vote ever occurred." Heather's face drained white under the afternoon sun. One of the older HOA residents, standing near the bait freezer, shook his head slowly like a man finally solving a puzzle that had bothered him for years. "She lied to everybody," he muttered. Daniel continued flipping through paperwork. Additionally, Marina key card records show your personal access code entered Dock C at 6:14 p.m. the day before the event. Heather looked around instinctively like somebody searching for support that no longer existed. Nobody moved. Nobody defended her. Nobody even spoke. The sound of dock ropes knocking softly against aluminum posts echoed across the water, while heat shimmered above the lake surface. Then Heather did something that told me she finally understood the situation. She stopped talking entirely. No speeches. No HOA authority voice. No fake Ismail. Just silence. Because for the first time in years, Heather Holloway had run out of people willing to believe her. 3 weeks later, Clearwater Cove felt quieter than I had ever seen it. The neighborhood still looked polished on the surface. Same trimmed hedges. Same golf carts humming down the streets at sunset. Same expensive patio furniture overlooking the water. But something underneath had changed. People nodded to each other more now. Conversations lasted longer at the Marina Cafe. Residents who spent years avoiding conflict suddenly started asking questions at HOA meetings. Funny what happens after. Somebody watches fake authority collapse in real time. The official investigation wrapped up faster than anybody expected. Turns out federal agencies move pretty quickly when registered marine systems get tampered with. Heather avoided criminal charges in the end, mostly because nobody was injured and the Coast Guard classified the incident as reckless, unauthorized operation instead of intentional sabotage. But civil penalties hit hard. Marina access suspended indefinitely. Thousands in damages and fines. Mandatory reimbursement for repairs, emergency response costs, and dock security replacement. The HOA board removed her as president during a closed session that lasted less than 40 minutes. Afterward, half the neighborhood acted shocked like they had not spent years enabling her behavior every time she weaponized a clipboard against somebody they disliked less than themselves. I was replacing the final dock chain one humid evening when Patricia Moore walked over carrying a paper bag that smelled like fresh fried shrimp from the Marina restaurant. Sunset painted the lake orange and gold behind her while cicadas buzzed loudly through the palm trees near the parking lot. "You know she is selling her house," Patricia said casually. I kept tightening the lock bracket. Not surprised. Apparently nobody wants to serve on the HOA board anymore either. That almost made me laugh. The great suburban tragedy. Suddenly nobody wanted power once accountability showed up attached to it. Patricia leaned against the dock rail beside me, watching sunlight ripple across the water. "Your father would have enjoyed this ending," she said quietly. That one landed deep. For a second, all I could hear was water tapping softly against the hull of the Mariner. Dad believed in simple rules. Respect people. Respect property. Respect water. Because eventually all three could humble you if you forgot your place. I climbed aboard the boat and started wiping down the helm console one final time before nightfall. Most of the party damage was gone now. Fresh chrome fittings, new docking light, clean fiberglass. But one tiny scratch still remained near the emergency beacon panel wear. Heather's bracelet must have scraped the surface while she tried shutting the system down. Funny enough, I decided to leave that mark there. A reminder. Luke walked down the dock, carrying 2 cold beers and a small cooler, while the last sunlight faded across the marina. "Lake finally feels peaceful again," he said. I looked out across the darkening water. Boats rocked gently against their slips under soft yellow dock lights. No sirens, no shouting, no fake speeches about community values from somebody treating the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Just water, quiet and steady. "Yeah," I said softly. Turns out the lake did not need a ruler after all. Somewhere across Clearwater Cove, another HOA meeting was probably happening under fluorescent lights and passive-aggressive smiles. But out on the water, none of that mattered anymore. The lake stayed calm long after the sirens left. And Heather Holloway learned the hard way that real authority does not come from a neighborhood title. Sometimes it arrives silently across dark water wearing a Coast